Welcome to Reimagining Anti-Violence Work, a small space where we're going to unpack the big issues currently impacting the anti-violence field and collectively dream up a new future. Hello, anti-violence workers, leaders, and anyone else that's made their way here. I'm your host, Steph Klotz, a former anti-violence worker and a member of the We Deserve Better project. Today, I'm joined by Jackie Strohm, one of the co-founders of the SOAR Collective and the We Deserve Better project. We'll be chatting about the project itself, as well as a national assessment of anti-violence workers that has brought to light many of the challenges advocates face on a daily basis. Welcome, Jackie.
Hi, Steph. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming. So to start, how did the We Deserve project come to be?
Great question. So, like you shared, I am one of the founders of the SOAR Collective, and our mission is to mobilize advocates to demand accountability and revolutionize the way anti-violence organizations operate. So, back in October of 2022, we got a message on Instagram from Survivors Know. They are a survivor-led organization that works to dismantle power-based violence. And we were able to meet up with some of the folks who were part of the Midwest Anti-Violence Solidarity Circle. So we got to chatting and brainstorming some ideas about how we might be able to work together. And conducting a national assessment was the idea that just happened to make the most sense at the time.
So what motivated you all to conduct that national assessment? What was it that made it make the most sense?
Yeah. So we had two reasons, I would say. One is that I had personally experienced workplace abuse and trauma, which caused me to quit my job as a prevention educator a few years ago. And throughout my time in the anti-violence movement, I had heard so many stories from other anti-violence workers about similar experiences. I mean, it's honestly the reason that we created the SOAR Collective in the first place. And I think is what drew a lot of people who are listening to this today. They might have had the same kinds of experiences.
Yeah, I know that's how I heard about the SOAR Collective is that when I was sharing my experience with someone, they shared about your work and certainly was validating for me. I'm so glad that you all are doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that is really helpful to hear because validation is one of our, primary goals of our work. And so I think that's also kind of goes really well with point number two, which is so I'm primarily trained as a social worker, but I'm also an evaluator. And I just know how powerful data and stories can actually be. And I felt like for the anti-violence movement to actually take this issue seriously, we needed to be able to back it up with data. And so I suggested that we collect info from anti-violence workers to really prove what we knew in our hearts to be true. So we're like aiming for that validation while also being able to prove to everybody like this is actually happening and it's something that we need to take really seriously so we can make those changes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know as an educator that oftentimes in the classroom, when you make a statement, people want to know, well, how is that proved? So um, I love that we're able to get that data and really back that up. And so I also know that for our research methods people, we want to know a little bit about the design. So how did you gather the information? What factors were you studying?
So we asked advocates to complete an assessment between the end of November 2022 through the middle of January 2023. And we defined advocate as anyone who was currently working at or had recently worked at a victim services organization. So this could be prevention educators, this could be counselors, this could be the folks who do the accounting and paperwork. So anybody that works at those organizations. And we had two key questions that we wanted to get to the bottom of. So the first one was, what are the primary challenges that advocates experience while working in the anti-violence field? And the second was, what changes can anti-violence agencies make to support advocates and survivors and actually improve systems? So what we did was we put the assessment We made it as an online survey and administered it via Airtable, which is a tool that survivors know had access to. And it included all kinds of question types. So we had multiple choice, check all that apply, and then some open-ended questions. And our goal was really to get it to as many people as possible. And so we circulated the survey on social media as well as emailing our networks. And we were really hoping for like 50 responses. But I am so excited to share that we actually got over 5 times that at 265 responses from 33 US states and territories.
Wow.
Yes. We kept seeing the numbers climb. And honestly, I just want to take a moment to really say thank you again to anybody who did complete the assessment because we're just truly so grateful that everyone like trusted us to share their stories with.
Yeah, such a vulnerable experience to entrust folks with that, especially, you mentioned that folks were still employed at their agency, so to share their story while working there, right? That's a lot of trust.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually did ask people very specifically if they were still working or if they had recently worked there. And so 80% were still employed at the time of completing the survey, and nearly half, so about 48%, said that they most recently worked at a dual agency. And then we had about 24% come from a rape crisis center. And we even had 12% of our respondents say that they worked at a state or territory coalition. So we were getting all kinds of different levels of folks.
Wow, so happening everywhere,
Yes, unfortunately,
unfortunately.
but yeah, we were really grateful that we got a mix of responses. And so some other stuff that might be helpful to understand how we administered this. We had everybody who completed the assessment check a box saying that they did consent to participate in the survey and that they would let us aggregate and anonymously share their responses in a report. And consent is a huge part of our work.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, so they were also told that they could skip any questions or exit the survey at any time. And then we recognize that it can be vulnerable or even more vulnerable to like share characteristics about your identity. So we made those questions optional. But we really did want to try to better understand who was completing the survey and if there were any disparities among, race, gender, how long you've been working at your organization, all of those different kinds of things. So basically, I then helped lead the analysis process along with support from some others on the We Deserve Better project team who had experience with thematic coding. And then we summarized our learnings into 8 key findings, and we were able to host a 3-part virtual summit to really share everything that we learned back. And then we launched our website in April of 2024 with all of that information, plus recommendations for a bunch of different roles in the anti-violence field. And we were so proud of ourselves by the time we finally got that website launched. And it took a while and much longer than we had hoped, but because we are a volunteer-run group, that is the nature of our work. And we really just wanted to make sure nobody was burning out in the process. So we had it take as long as it needed to take. And it's something that everyone can go look at now.
Well, that's really amazing. And certainly I really respect that you talked about not burning out during the process, right? You have to model the values and morals that we're looking to kind of rebrand into the system. So really powerful there.
Yeah, it wasn't easy because again, we kept telling people like, this is coming, we're gonna share this back with you. But
Yeah.
building a website is no joke. And even when we update it now, it takes a lot longer than you'd think, especially to try to make something accessible for everybody. So we're we're just thrilled that it's all on there and that people can kind of browse it at their leisure or go back and reference it, or there's like a link that they can actually share with the people at their organizations or their peers to really dive deeper into what does make a thriving anti-violence organization.
Yeah. So much really powerful information on that website. So, speaking of which, what are the key findings that emerged from that study? And did any of those come as a surprise to you?
Unfortunately, I wasn't all that surprised, but it was extremely validating and simultaneously really disheartening. Um, as I was reading through and analyzing all of the responses, it was almost traumatic in and of itself. Like it was a form of vicarious trauma that I did not anticipate when we first set out to do this.
That makes a lot of sense. I can imagine how traumatizing that might be. I know that as I opened up and started to share my story and started to hear the stories of others that had also experienced abuse and trauma in their workplace, I really started to have a re-experience of trauma that I was not expecting. So, how did you all manage that? Were you able to be like a community care for the assessment team? Did you all kind of band together, or what did that look like?
Yeah, it required taking a lot of breaks. And honestly, that's probably something I didn't even think about why some of this might have taken longer than we had hoped. But, you'd work all week and then I'd like sit down on a Saturday and be like, great, I'm going to analyze these 265 responses. And you'd get through some of them and I'd have to just walk away or like go on a walk or say that has to be enough for today because it was, yeah, bringing up all kinds of things that I had experienced, that others had experienced. And again, I just felt this deep sense of trust that people, wanted to share their stories with us. And so I wanted to honor that and make sure that we weren't rushing the process because when people open up like that, the same way, that survivors open up and share their stories, we want to make sure that I keep using the word honor, but it really
Yeah.
was just important to me to make sure that whatever the end result of this assessment was, that people did feel validated and heard, and that there was like something tangible that could happen as a next step. And so, I think we all just in the group really had to take our time and slow down and make sure that everyone was feeling supported and good before we moved on to actually writing up the key findings.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a big responsibility, right?
Yes.
Not something that you take lightly when you're carrying um, so many. It's really a privilege to hear someone's story of abuse, right? And so to then the idea of using that to make change, right, is even more powerful and important. So
Yeah,
now
absolutely.
on to those key findings.
Yes. So I don't think we have time to go through like all of them in a ton of detail, but I'm going to pick a couple that I think will really resonate with our listeners. And so the first one is that advocates are deeply passionate about creating safe and thriving communities and are committed to supporting survivors. And they're doing everything they can to keep working in this movement, but it's really, really hard. And when we ask them about the challenges that they face or reasons why they may have left their role, the top answer, of which 69% of advocates selected, was insufficient pay.
Mm,
And I know that's not a surprise to probably anybody listening, but when you actually see the data in front of you, it's just really sad to know that people are putting their hearts and souls into this work and not being truly compensated for it.
yeah, and I think it's a lot of folks that take a position knowing that they want to care deeply about a position and that they're willing to sacrifice finances for that, and that it's that they're unable to make it sustainable, right? And I just want to highlight domestic violence, anti-violence is the lowest paid of all fields in social work, right? It's the lowest paid social problem. And so, right, it's not just like, oh, wow, we want more money. It's the lowest paid social problem and one of the highest occurring social problems. And here we are, right? So it's insufficient pay is it's a real issue.
It 100% is. And actually, we made an entire key finding around that because it was so important. So, one of our others was that anti-violence workers deserve better pay and benefits, and many are struggling to survive, just like you said. And kind of as some of those follow-up questions around challenges, we actually also asked about like what resources and support are actually needed to allow you to keep working in your role, or would have made you not quit. And the top three responses all had to do with money. So 80% said better pay. 61% said guaranteed economic advancement, which we gave some examples around, like consistent raises. And then 55% said debt relief, which included examples of like student loan assistance or help with home ownership. And so it just it wasn't surprising. It's just again really heartbreaking because we also know that so many advocates are survivors themselves. And if you're not compensating advocates who might be experiencing abuse at home, how can they ever potentially leave those unsafe situations? It just like creates even more potential violence to be happening by not paying a living wage to folks.
Yeah, certainly not an equitable model or a model that even works to end the systemic problem that you're working against.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other two key findings that I wanted to uplift really echo what you're saying, that it's kind of perpetuating some more of the problems that we say we're against. So, one of them is that with little to no support from their organizations, advocates are experiencing burnout, secondary trauma, and compassion fatigue. And it was actually 65% of advocates who said that they did, in fact, experience all of that. Um, and so, yeah, we know that not everyone feel supported by their leadership team, by their supervisors, by their peers. And this can really cause some people to leave, like including myself. I felt like I came in as a really this young, you know, 23-year-old who's like, I want to help make the world a better place and I really care about this issue. But then I felt like I was being exploited for having passion and having a personal connection to the work. And sure, maybe working at the coalition, I was making, slightly more money than someone at a local center would be making. But it's like unless you have a partner who also
Mhm.
works and has that double income, like most people can't afford to stay. And so you have the pay and then you have the lack of support and you're feeling constantly like, I still care, so I have to stay. Um, but for me, at least, my partner was telling me that, I wasn't acting like myself and I needed to get out of there. And it's a really, really hard thing to actually leave this field.
Yeah, I hear from so many of my former coworkers and from so many advocates all around about their experiences and just my own personal experiences. And I think what also we see happening is a lot of agencies really promoting wellness initiatives while at the same time really not actually doing anything to promote the wellness of their staff. And we know that being able to set a boundary, like saying no, is one of the best ways to promote your wellness. And that that's not really a viable option for a lot of folks, and that the burnout and the fatigue is maybe sometimes retaliated against, right? When it's like, well, you have this wellness issue, right? You need to take care of yourself, right? Self-care, wellness. We've got this wellness initiative. And so then when your symptoms, right, are expressed, um, you're not supported, right? Because there's that wellness initiative. And so that I think might actually kind of connect a little bit to our next finding, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 100%. So the last key finding we wanted to bring up is that leadership at anti-violence organizations often replicate the same toxic, abusive, and violent environments and power dynamics that this movement aims to prevent, which for me, I saw it happening in real time. I would hear about it from other people, but to have so many people write it down and send it to us again was just simultaneously validating and disheartening. And so we don't have like a stat that 100% lines up with this, but we asked some other questions. A lot of this key finding came from just open-ended questions or open-ended responses from those questions. But we did know that at least 48% said ineffective management was a challenge or a reason that they left their role. And 47% said there was a lack of transparency from organizational leadership and their board of directors. And
Hmm.
it's so fascinating how if people, especially the folks at the top, would just like share some additional information with people, how I actually think it could solve so many problems because it feels like you trust your staff. You want to bring them into the problem and help problem solve together.
Yeah, Jackie, that's such an amazing point because we also know that transparency and being open with your staff connects to vicarious trauma. And so when you withhold information from people that have vicarious trauma, it is creating more trauma for them, right? And so you're actually just snowballing, right? What you're trying to do by, controlling the narrative or whatever is going on with withholding this information is actually making it a lot worse for staff that are really just so vulnerable, like a live wire, because of this constant trauma and crisis that they're navigating because of the work that they're doing, right? Without the support that they need. And then to just not also get information, right? Would you say we're living in tumultuous times?
I would have to agree with you.
Yeah, I would say that we're living in tumultuous times, and I think the anti-violence movement and organizations are on, the front line of being impacted by that. And so when your leadership isn't sharing what's going on, and you might be jobless, it doesn't really feel very good. Does that feel good for your trauma?
No,
No, it
not
doesn't
at
feel
all.
good. No. And so, I think that all for me it kind of all like snowballs together, right? That these things kind of like are one, that the leadership and withholding information and that abuse of power, and then the way that interacts with the trauma and the burnout, that is, and then you don't have money to pay for the things. Listen, money doesn't solve all your problems, but it's going to help with your burnout. It's going to help if you need to leave your job, right? So all these things all kind of are are really interwoven together. We can't really separate them out from the impact that it's like intersectionally having on workers.
That is such a great point. And on top of it, other people were sharing experiences about different forms of oppression, discrimination, really just hostile and traumatizing work environments. And it is the exact opposite of what we would want survivors to experience. So the fact that it's happening within the four walls of anti-violence organizations, to me, it just always feels like we're doing something so wrong. We're doing something so backwards. And part of me, I think we kind of know why, right? Because you talked about retaliation before, like if you're feeling burnt out and you're like, I need a day off, and people are like, yeah, but we need you because, someone has to be on call. So we also asked folks if they had tried to hold their leadership accountable in one way or another. And 60% said that they did. But the people who said that they didn't, the primary reason was that they were afraid of retaliation. And we went back and looked at some of the reports that were filed with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, I believe. And more than half of all discrimination claims filed with them in 2020 included an accusation of retaliation. So, like, there is legitimate fear when you are trying to go to leadership and say, hey, this isn't okay, or you're hurting the rest of the staff, you're hurting our community. Like, please listen to us, please try doing something different. And then, like, instead of seeing that as such a vulnerable and courageous gift that workers are giving their leaders, they just go on the attack. And oftentimes folks get pushed out and they just like make it a place where they don't want to be there anymore. So inevitably they leave.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that, but I think I'll just say that it takes a really smart and humble and wise leader to accept feedback from the people that they lead.
100%.
And unfortunately, we don't seem to have a lot of those currently in our field. And we need more of them
We
because a
really
real
do.
leader is with the people, not above them. And, I think for me, it was like the ultimate gaslight that abuse would be happening, right, within this kind of agency. And we know that decades ago, there was a power and control wheel of the way that staff, use power and control on the residents within a shelter. These things are top down. We are doing a disservice to this mission if we don't address this, right? We can't provide a safe space for clients, for staff, many of whom have lived experience, even if they don't deserve it, right? We deserve better.
100% Steph.
So, I have already mentioned just the real power that these survey results had for me, and the way it freed me from the isolation that I was feeling. How have other advocates responded to the results of this survey? And what about leadership?
Yeah. So every time that we've had an opportunity to present this somewhere, or even folks, will write in on social media or send us an email and let us know that the findings from this assessment have been so incredibly validating. They no longer feel alone or that this is only happening to them or only at their organization. And for me, it's like that. I know that doesn't change all of the bad things, but it at least lets people feel like I'm not alone in this and there's other people working on it. And, you know, I think what some of those advocates have tried to do is share this with their leadership. And, we're not always having opportunities to go out and present, but when we do, I think it's very telling when a coalition or a local program actually invites us to come share this information with the rest of their state, with their membership, or just with their staff because they're actually trying to do better. They recognize that this is really happening. These are the real lived experiences of people in this movement, and that they have an opportunity to learn and do better. Like, just because someone is an executive director does not mean they have all the answers. It does not mean that they know all of the things. Oftentimes, it's who's ever been working there the longest, and when the last one retires, usually, then that person gets promoted. And so we need to do a better job of actually like training our leadership, like you said. And I think I just feel encouraged when people do want to bring us around to say the hard stuff out loud in front of the people that are experiencing this. And then it's even cooler when they actually make a commitment to trying to do better. And so I hope to see more of that in this upcoming year.
Yeah, me too. And I'll just add that nobody needs to know how to do everything, right? That's why we have a team. And it's
Yeah.
just about knowing what you know and trusting that the other one knows what they know and is
Mhm.
going to do what they need to do. So, where do we go from here? In the time since you've conducted this study, what potential solutions have emerged?
That is a great question. And on our website, we have recommendations for four different roles in the anti-violence field. We have them for workers themselves, for the advocates. We also have some recommendations for organizational leaders, for coalitions and technical assistance providers, and then also for funders and philanthropists because I feel like that could be a whole podcast episode talking about the funding aspect of this, but everyone
Gonna
does
be.
I can't wait. But everyone does play a role and a different role. And so there are different things that we can all be doing. So, like, funders can actually say, we're not giving you this funding unless you pay your workers a living wage, right?
Mic drop.
They have the potential to do that, right? Um, I don't know. It sounds really simple, but like organizational leaders, it's like hold a listening session with your staff, thank them for everything that they've said, and then take accountability for any harm that you've caused and make a plan on how you're going to do better. Like some of this stuff is really simple. Other stuff is much more complicated and can take a whole lot longer to actually implement. But we all need to be working on this simultaneously because it sounds really silly. And it's so easy to place the blame solely on leadership. Like I 100% have done some of that when I was working in my agency. But I've had some time to reflect and also understand that, like, if we're not saying the hard things out loud, even to each other, even if you're not in a leadership position or you're not taking those concerns to leadership or taking them to HR or whoever, go to the board. Like, I know there are risks involved with all of this. And because of the pay issues we've been talking about, like, it's hard to risk your livelihood. But really, if you can, I don't know, build some power in numbers, like get people together, you can, I think, have a positive impact and hopefully folks will start listening.
Yeah, and I think also I would echo that not every solution is right for every organization, and you have to find the thing that's going to be right for your team, your organization, your community. And so that's why there's so many different recommendations.
For sure. And so something else that we have been working on is we've been working with Raft to actually conduct interviews to find out like what makes an anti-violence organization thriving and sustainable. And we can link this with the episode too in case folks are curious. But I will just say the three things that we found after doing our initial round of interviews that make a big difference is supervisor support, transparency and communication, and flexibility and trust. And what's hilarious to me is that, like, this is so glaringly obvious and also kind of simple, right? Like, you're supporting your staff. And how can you do that? Oh, by transparently communicating things, by listening, by when your staff says, I have a doctor's appointment, I have to pick up my kid from school, I have to take my pet to the vet. Great, give them that time off. Like, you don't need to ask questions. You need to trust that if they need to work from home because the repair person is coming that day or they're not feeling super great, trust that they are doing the best that they can, unless they give you reasons not to. But, like, create the kind of culture where you're treating people as human beings first, not workers.
Preach. Yeah. I don't know what else to say about that because I think, um, yeah, we're a nonprofit. We're not a capitalist lemming, and we're not a cog in a machine, right?
Right.
So, how can someone learn more about the We Deserve Better project or get involved?
Well, we would love to get people more involved. So we've been talking about our website. It's wedeservebetter.work. We also have Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky accounts that we try to post to a couple times a month, which are also linked on our website. We also send out email blasts, and you can sign up on our website under the Stay Connected page. And then I don't know that we totally went into this, but we are a volunteer run group. And what's super cool is that everybody kind of picks a project that they want to work on. Like this podcast, Steph is working on right now. And so folks have an opportunity to take those ideas and run with them. And they're supported by a group of people who, want to make those things happen. So in addition to the podcast, we also have something called Talk It Out Together, which happens on the third Tuesday of every month. And we have an opportunity to just like connect and chat and vent and problem solve with other anti-violence workers. And then something fun that a few of us are working on is we're just calling it the Unionizing Project for right now, but we've really heard from folks that organizing your workplace is something people are curious about and would like to know more about and hear from folks who have successfully unionized, from folks who have not been successful and wanting to learn like lessons learned or how would we have done this differently. So there's going to be a survey soon, like a different kinds of needs assessment that we're hoping folks will want to participate in. And so if any of that or some other idea that you all have that you want to make be a reality. We have our volunteer page on the website, and essentially we ask you to complete a short questionnaire, and then everyone who submits the questionnaire will be invited to participate in a group interview. And we've decided, just for capacity reasons, that we're going to do this twice a year in March and September. And it's just an opportunity to get to meet the people who are already working on the project and the folks who want to join. And if you can't make that, we'd be happy to meet with you one-on-one. And that's really all folks have to do. I will also say, if that feels like way too big of a commitment, you can also like share our posts, refer people to us to be podcast guests. I don't know, really anything you can think of, even if you just have an idea, but you don't have the capacity to make it happen, send us a message and we'll see what we can do, because this is a really emergent project and we just want to work on things that are responsive to the needs of anti-violence workers. So we'd love to have you, or love to have you kind of share what we've been doing, like this podcast episode.
Jackie, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing about your work with the SOAR Collective and the We Deserve Better project. Hopefully, all of you listening out there were validated in your experiences, inspired to raise awareness, or maybe even both. Be sure to take a moment to care for yourselves after listening. While these results are validating, they're still a bit hard to swallow. In our next episode, we'll be kicking off our Survivor series, where we'll hear from folks navigating vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout, as well as those with lived experience of abuse in the anti-violence workplace. If you or someone you know is interested in sharing their story, please email wedeservebetterproject@gmail.com with the subject podcast. Thanks for listening. Remember, anti-violence work is neither anti-violent nor working to end violence. So keep talking and reimagining amongst yourselves.